All right. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So again, welcome to the Building Your CU-GARS Interview Toolkit webinar. We are so excited to have you all join us tonight. There are a handful of us that are current students in the program who will be speaking with you all tonight and hopefully making you feel super prepared for your interviews, which are happening in just over a week, which is super exciting. So I'll start us off with some introductions on who your presenters are tonight. So my name is Haley Swanson. I am a second year. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a graduate assistant with Bridge to Clemson Supplemental Instruction. And I'm originally from Thousand Oaks, California.
Hey everyone, my name is Sam Press. I use he, him pronouns. I'm also a second year graduate student in the program, and I work in the Center for Career and Professional Development, where I work with the UPIC internship program, and I am from Virginia.
Hi everyone, my name is Madison Biney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a first year in the program, and same as Haley, I am a graduate assistant with Bridge to Clemson doing supplemental instruction, and I am from Saratoga, California.
All right, so now that you know who we are going to jump right in, and Sam is going to kick us off with some interview tips. And feel free to throw questions in the chat throughout. We'll do our best to answer them, but there will also be a Q&A portion at the end where we hope to answer all of your questions.
All right, so we're all virtually interviewing for CU-GARS this year, which can be a little bit intimidating for interviews nonetheless, but also being virtual. So we're gonna go through 10 tips for how to interview virtually. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna want to do some trial runs. You're gonna wanna set up your Zoom and chat with a friend, someone else in the program, one of us. Check your lighting, check your outfit, check your internet connection, make sure everything's stable, make sure there's no echo, make sure that you have everything where you need to be, have your cat locked away so he's not jumping up on your lap in the middle of your interview like mine does. And try your best to replicate what it's going to be the day that you start to go into your interviews. Concentrate, make sure you close all the other tabs on your computer, turn off your Outlook notifications, have your phone in the other room, make sure that your headphones are plugged in. If you're going to use headphones, make sure they're charged if you're going to use wireless headphones. And if you're not using headphones at all, make sure that you, again, going back to that trial run, making sure you don't have an echo and everyone can hear you clearly. Use direct eye contact. I know it's very easy to have yourself and the interviewer on the screen and want to look at them, but try your best to look into the camera as I am right now, and that'll best replicate how you can have personal eye contact. Another trick is to get yourself a box or a couple of old textbooks if you have them, and get your laptop on an elevated space so that you're not, looking down into the camera or they're looking up at you. Get your laptop to an eye level so that it's perfectly even. Speak clearly and slowly. I know it's very nerve-wracking and you're going to want to go in and tell them all about yourself and all the experiences you've had, and you're only going to get 15, 20 minutes or so in each interview, but really make sure that you have a plan. Going back to that preparation, make sure you have a list by your side of things that you want to make sure you talk about, and as you go through the interview, make connections between what they're asking for and what you've already had prepared. That can really help you slow down and start to speak to the things that you want to speak about rather than having to find that answer along the way. I'm going to throw it over to Madison for part 2 of this list.
Yeah, so a few more tips for you. The first one that I would say is definitely take notes. I sometimes get kind of stressed in interviews and it's easy to sort of forget some of your main points or the questions that you want to ask. So I would definitely recommend not only writing down the questions that you want to ask the employers, but some notes on their responses as well. And also the interviewers' names. You want to make sure that you have this for thank you notes, for follow-up emails, all of those sorts of things. And all of the notes will also be really important context for you when you're going in and ranking your preferences later. because it will be somewhat of a long day of interviews, and at a certain point things can kind of start to run together. So if you have notes, it just helps you stay organized, know who you're talking to, what you discussed in that interview, and that will be really helpful for you all to reflect on later. The next tip would be self-care, whatever this looks like for you. Whether that's like taking a step away from the screen. I know it can kind of hurt your eyes sometimes just staring at the computer all day. I know I get headaches really easily. So get up, stretch, drink some water, maybe chat with like other people in your apartment or house, just to kind of take a break from the interview setting. You will ideally have a little bit of time in between interviews, so you're not going back to back to back, so you can kind of take a breath. You know, interviews can be really stressful, but overall we want GARS to be a really good experience for you. And so making sure that you're doing what you can to kind of get the nerves out, get the jitters out, so you're fresh for each interview. The next tip would be to ask questions at the end of the interview. All of the employers will leave time for you to ask questions. And just in general, you should always have a question to ask. We'll talk a little bit more later on about what some of those questions could be, but I would recommend that you all keep in mind that you're pretty much interviewing these employers too, just as much as they're wanting to get to know you, you're wanting to get to know the office, the position, who you would be working with, all those sorts of things. So ask questions about things that are important to you, whether that's working styles, office culture, all those sorts of things, because you want to make sure that not only are you a good fit for the office, but that the office and the role are a good fit for you as well. The next tip is be honest. You're going to have a much more memorable interview if you're honest and personable, and, you know, be the person that you're going to be when you actually come to work in the fall. And keep in mind that this is student affairs. We're all pretty supportive people here. Everyone's rooting for you. And even if maybe you're not the best fit for a particular office, all of the employers are lovely people and still really want you to do well and to find a place that's going to be an excellent fit for you. So don't be afraid to share if this is your first virtual interview, if you're kind of nervous. I know I mentioned that in several of my interviews that I was pretty nervous and kind of tired because it was a long day. But you know, it kind of gives you something to jump off of, and can lead to some more small talk that can help you build those connections with the employers and help you see, would that be a good supervisory fit for you? And then the last tip would be to relax. I know that it can feel like a lot. It's definitely a really, really long day, but it's really not going to be as bad as you think. Like Sam said, the interviews are pretty fast. And once you get in the groove of doing like the first one or two, I thought it became kind of fun, and I'm pretty introverted and don't really love interviews typically. But you know, it's exciting to talk about the things that you love and hear from people that also really enjoy what they do, and kind of figure out what your future in student affairs might look like. So those are some tips that we have for all of you, but I want to pause really quickly and see if anyone has any questions on these interview tips or any other interview tips, or if anyone has some experiences with virtual interviews that they'd like to share. And that could be from anyone, not just people that are in the program on the call.
I have one.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So for I did a NOTA internship with the NOTA annual conference last year, and there were a whole like series of virtual interviews that I had to do, and I definitely did not do tip number one because I had to just frantically find a room in the office that I work in, and I found a private room to go to, but the echoing in there was wild. Like my voice was like reverberating back through, and they could not understand what I was saying. So I had to go outside the building and sit on the ground, like in my slacks, while students were walking by, and it was just not a great controlled environment. I was very nervous throughout the entire thing. I say all that to say that I still got the job. So even if things go wrong, that doesn't mean that it's not going to end up working out for you. So just remember to try and stay calm if something does happen. It's okay, quick problem solve, and just know that the employers are probably just as nervous as you are to be doing these interviews virtually as you say you are. So just keep that in mind too, because you're not the only one who is going to be nervous in that equation.
Hey guys.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Man. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sam.
No. I want to hear from y'all. You'll hear
Mine's
more
not
from me
big.
later.
My name's Keaton. The only tip I was gonna say is that if you have a Mac, it's really good to look at the green light. It looks weird, or it feels weird, but it's super helpful for employers. I only know that because I have interviewed virtually many a times. So
Absolutely. And I just wanted to share a brief anecdote with y'all just about interviewing at GARS in general. You're going to have, 3, 4, 5, 10 interviews over the course of the whole weekend or day. And some of them you might really, really have your heart set on, and you're going to come out of the interview and be like, I killed it. And then you won't get that position for one reason or another. Keep in mind those thank you notes and that networking that comes with these interviews. From my personal experience, I really, really wanted to work in Greek life. I thought I killed the interview. I didn't get the position, and that ended up being my summer internship. I reached out to them when I first got to Clemson. I said, hey, I just want to thank you guys, for interviewing me. I really enjoyed our conversations. If there's an opportunity to work with you guys in the future, please let me know. And I did multiple trainings with them over the fall semester, and then it ended up being my summer internship. So you never know what it could turn into. And ultimately, you guys will end up where you're supposed to be.
Amanda, did you have something you wanted to share?
Hi, yeah, sorry, I'm not really sure of how this works. But no, I don't remember who said it, but somebody, was talking about their environment. I can't see myself in this camera, but I definitely did an interview with this guy behind me. This is the monkey that hangs from the light in my bedroom. And so that was, I'll admit it was a little embarrassing at first, but it was definitely a conversation starter. So yeah, definitely check your background, but also learn how to roll with the punches.
Yeah, I think that's great. Good conversation starter, at least. I see Gretchen in the chat saying something similar. Check your background, make sure everything that's in the picture is appropriate and professional. That is a great idea. If that's something that you're nervous about, or I don't know, you didn't make your bed that morning or something like that, the background's a little messy, you can always use a virtual background because that's kind of the easiest way, like the lovely one I have behind me, just to make sure that, no one's going to see anything you don't want them to see. And that could also be a fun way to kind of show off something about you or your personality or your experience. It doesn't have to be just something blank. We have all of these kind of buttons showing some of the things that we're involved in. So you can pick something that's unique to you and use that as a conversation starter as well. One thing that I was going to add too, I know we've mentioned follow-up emails and thank you notes a couple of times. I don't know I just didn't really realize that that was a thing until I was coming to GARS last year, that people would write thank you notes for everyone. And so I kind of scrambled last minute to get some thank you notes together, but very important to write down everybody's names. If you don't get everyone's names, just say to the office of whatever, just keep it vague, right? That's easy. But another thing that I'll add too is, like we said, the interviews can be kind of quick. So if you run out of time to ask all of the questions that you want, there's nothing wrong with sending a follow-up email. You should be able to find everyone's contact information pretty easily. And if you can't get it, then you can reach out to your host and they can help you. But I emailed several offices with some extra questions I didn't have time to get to, and they sent me back very detailed answers that were really helpful for ranking all of the assistantships after the interviews were over. So that's something else I'd add. Does anyone have any other experiences or questions that they wanted to share? Okay, I see Keaton has a question. Do we send thank you notes by mail or by email? That is a good question, actually, because when we were doing this last year, we had kind of a system set up to get thank you notes in. Does anyone else know if we have something set up for that this year?
I'm not sure if we have anything set up for physical thank you notes, but your anyone who's interviewing you, like Madison said, their email will be easily accessible. And if you can't find it, you can definitely get that information from your host. So I would definitely say an email would be your safest bet for ensuring that it would reach that person. And even when we were in person, I sent a few follow-up emails because I ran out of physical thank you notes. So I think email is a great way to go this year and environmentally friendly.
All right, so now that we've got all of our tips, what should we expect to be asked when we sit down for the interview? Now, every interview site's going to be different. They're all going to have their own sets of questions. More often than not, they'll probably ask everyone the same exact questions. But some questions that you'll definitely be asked based on my experiences, they're going to ask you. The first question is going to be, tell me about yourself. And in that question, it's not regurgitate for me everything that's on your resume, but it's reintroduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, where are you from, what school are you from, what was your undergraduate degree, and then what's your reason for being here, what's your passion in student affairs, why are you interested in this role. All of those kind of fit into that tell me about yourself question, and I'd say get that answer like down right now before you go into the interviews, because they are going to ask it, and it's not something that you want to stumble over for the first question of your interview. You should be pretty sure of yourself of why you're here and why you're interviewing for the position. Some positions may come with supervising roles. You may be supervising undergraduate students. If you have experience with supervising people, be it in a work setting or in a leadership role, great. If you don't, just start to try and think about how you might approach different situations. If you're going into residence life, they're gonna ask you some questions of how you deal with interpersonal issues. How do you manage your time? We're going into a program where you're going to be in 9 hours a week, plus 20 to 28 hours in your assistantship, plus in your second semester, a practicum or an internship. So there's a lot of time to be managed. They're going to want to know, how do you manage all that? How did you do it in your undergrad? And how do you set yourself up to be successful in your graduate assistantship? 2020 has taught us all a bunch of new skills. So they're going to probably ask you about what you've picked up since then, working virtually, adapting, knowing how to show your adaptability is really going to be a good skill that these employers are going to be looking for. And then they're going to want to try and find that fit. Like we talked about earlier, the interview is not just about finding your qualifications, but seeing if you're a good fit to work at this site. So they're going to ask you, how do we know if you're having a good or bad day? How do you like to receive praise? If you're on a team, what role would you play? And the answer that you give there should be honest, like we talked about before, but also do some research and know, is this a big office? Is this a small office? Am I going to be working very closely with my supervisor? Am I going to be working closer with my undergrads and just reporting up? And then also, as we're talking about, questions that you might get asked, we're going to talk about some questions that you might prepare for to ask the interviewers. You should really be ready for 3 to 5. And I think Madison or Haley, I'm sorry, I forget which one was next, is going to talk about some of those questions.
Sam, there was a question in the chat about since the interviews are fairly quick, how long should they try and make their answers be? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, so I believe, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, there'll be 30-minute time slots, I believe, for each interview. So that 30-minute time slot is everything. That's, hi, I'm Sam, I'm sitting down, nice to meet you, to, all right, thank you, have a nice day. That's 30 minutes. So you're really probably getting 20, 25 minutes of actual interview time. I would say probably you'd want to reserve at least 5 to 10 minutes of that for yourself. So as far as how you answer questions, there's always going to be a long answer and a short answer. And for those of you who are expert interviews, I'm sure you've heard of this before, but use the STAR method. The STAR method stands for situation, task, action, and result. So the situation being who were you working with, where was this, when was this, the task, what was the problem, what were you trying to solve, what were you trying to accomplish, what was your goal, action, what did you do to achieve that goal or solve that problem, and then result, because I did XYZ, this is what happened. We solved the problem. We put on a fantastic event. All of that method, that storyline method of answering questions, again, going back to that preparation piece, you should be able to give a full and concise answer with that. So I know that doesn't answer your question with how long they should be, but concise enough so that you can answer all the questions and ask yours, but long enough to where you give the full scope of the question.
Great point. And thanks. So now we're going to move on to questions you'd ask. Computer. I may just wing my memory, so possibly. You might need to, Sam.
We'll let you stop sharing.
No, it is frozen.
And you have disabled screen sharing, so it won't let me do that.
Try now.
How's that?
Sam saves the day. All right, perfect. Questions worth asking. Okay, so self to ask because you are interviewing the office just as much as they're interviewing you. So something I found helpful for me, as far as thinking of a list of questions that I wanted to ask each office, was really prioritizing what I wanted to know from that office and prioritizing things that I couldn't find myself on the office's or department's website. So I think it's super important to do your research about the office and come prepared with questions based off of that research that you've done, because that will also show to them that you've done that research, that you've prepared for that interview, and that you are very invested and interested in that position. I'm not talking like extensive hours upon hours upon hours of research, but look up some of their key programs, look up what they do so that you can ask more in-depth questions about things that you could possibly be involved with as a graduate assistant in that office. So the first one is really, what is the office culture like? That's pretty broad, but that can cover, office working relationships, what do those working partnerships look like? What do those look like in and out of the office? What do those look like virtually? Any and everything like that. That question kind of encompasses a lot of things. What does the graduate assistant and supervisor relationship look like in your office? Most of the time, I feel like you will be interviewed by the person who would be your supervisor if you were to receive that role. So it's really important, I think, that you ask about that and see, what that relationship would look like. If you have an idea of what you want that relationship to look like, and their answer doesn't match up, then maybe it's not the best fit. Or if you're not sure, but you want to hear what they have to say, that's great too. How is self-care advocated for in this office? This one is huge. If everyone should be big on self-care and whatever that looks like for you, and that is super important in grad school. There's a lot that is asked of you as a student and as a graduate assistant, and so looking for an office that will support you as a student, as a person first, and a student second, and a graduate assistant third, is super important, because you should always come first before the job. A quality you like to see in a grad. This is like kind of one of those questions where you can ask it and then, they respond with like, oh, we love grads who are organized. And then you can follow up with, thank you for answering. I think I can really bring a lot to the table when it comes to my organization skills. So it's like another chance for you to sort of throw your hat in the ring there and be like, yeah, I'm super organized. And that's why I asked you that question. Another big one, how did your office support staff during the beginning stages of COVID, and what does that look like now? A lot of offices obviously had to hit the ground running last March when things really transitioned to being fully online, and asking what that looks like today will show the office's ability to adapt and navigate during these circumstances, and how they've been flexible throughout that. Asking about challenges that they foresee the person stepping in this role facing. This is also important because it shows, you're being futuristic, you're thinking ahead, you're preparing yourself for the possibility of being in this role and having to tackle those obstacles. And then lastly, this is a big one because this sort of varies across all assistantships, but professional development opportunities they come in all shapes and sizes in all these assistantships that you may be interviewing for. And so that's really crucial. Having access to professional development opportunities is a really big privilege. And so asking those offices what that may look like in this role is also really important. I want to pause here before we hear from our amazing panelists and see if anyone has any follow-up questions, either on the questions to prepare for or questions worth asking. Okay, we'll move on, but if you think of one, feel free to put it in the chat since we're going to start off with our panelist Q&A.
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that we included some time for you all to ask whatever questions you might have about interviewing in general, but especially interviewing virtually. So I'll let Dylan and Rachel go ahead and introduce themselves in just a second, but just for you all to know, they both participated in GARS virtually last year. So they have a very similar experience to what all of you are going through, did all of their interviews virtually, and they obviously were successful. They made it here. They're pretty great. So I'll let the two of them introduce themselves and then we can start asking some questions. Dylan, you can go first.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. My name's Dylan, as it says on the wonderful slide here. I didn't know this photo was going to be chosen from me, but I guess it's a good photo, so I'll take that. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the graduate assistant for student leadership development in the Center for Student Leadership and Engagement.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a first year in the program, so again, did GARS interviews virtually last year. And I currently serve as the graduate assistant for transfer academic programs, which is in like the bridge and transfer office here at Clemson.
Cool. So, oh, thanks, Sam. Now we can all see each other. That's much better. All right, so I want to make sure that you all have time to get all of your questions answered. So you can send your questions in the chat. You can unmute yourselves and ask if you want. If that gets too chaotic, then maybe we can do the hand raising thing that Amanda tried earlier because that seems to be successful. But does anyone have questions to start us off?
I have a question just kind of about like the process afterwards, like if you do get extended an offer for an assistantship. I know like some schools, if you get extended an offer, like you have until April 15th, I think it is, like deadline. But like there's been a couple of schools that say like you have to respond within like 2 to 3 days or like sometimes a week. So what is like the time frame for that? And then I guess if it is where you only have a couple days, like how do you like go through the process of like making sure you're going to the place that you feel like you're gonna like get the most out of and fit in the most?
Could you repeat the very last part of your question? I was totally following it with like the dates and everything, and then Can you just repeat just that last part?
Yeah. So like if it is something where you do have to decide like within like a couple days after if they extend you an offer, I guess I should ask first, like, do you have until like the April 15th or do you do? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I guess then I don't need to answer. Well, I mean, I guess still, sorry, I'm all over the place
Oh,
today.
no, you're so good. From what I remember, Clemson was pretty quick about getting back to you with the offer. So it wasn't like you interviewed in February and didn't hear back until the first week of April. So I think honestly, Clemson might have been the first one to let me know about an assistantship offer versus the other programs that I was applying to. So it felt like a quick turnaround, but I remember still I took some time to still decide and definitely sent in my acceptance notification very close to the April 15th deadline.
Okay.
Yeah, you have time.
And I guess like going off of that, so like if it comes down to the point where like if somebody does get offered like multiple assistantships at different institutions, like what did it all look like for y'all when you were trying to figure out what was gonna like be the best for you? Like do you have any advice for that, or if there's any other questions that like we should ask that has to do with that during the interview?
That's a really good question. For the first part, I know I literally didn't accept my assistantship till like April 14th. So it's absolutely 100% okay for you to take as long as possible. I think with that, as long as you're communicating with whoever your potential supervisor or whoever's interviewing, everyone's gonna be completely understanding of like what you're dealing with. And especially right now in the times we're in, time and patience is just a well-needed thing. In regards to the second part of the question, I think that for me, a lot of it was, where can I go in an environment that's different than my undergrad, where I could challenge and grow in different ways? So I went to a small liberal arts college, and Clemson is obviously a large research one institution. So that was a priority for me. I wanted an office that would challenge me by doing some things that I'd done in the past, but also had tasks and programs that I had never even done before. And so for me, it was between two schools, and I selected Clemson because of that relationship I had with the people I was interviewing, who are now my supervisors. They were just completely invested in me the whole time. They wanted to make sure that it was a good fit for me. They were completely like calm and understanding with how long it took me to make that decision, especially because like COVID hit right after GARS. And so like that whole mess just created a thing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that definitely does. Thank you. Sorry, I know I was kind of all over the place with that question. So I appreciate all the answers. It definitely helped. It makes me feel a lot better too.
And I'll go ahead and start answering, I think, Gretchen, your question about what did I feel like was the most challenging part of interviewing virtually. I have to say, I am definitely someone who hadn't really had any experience with virtual interviewing before sitting down last year, and then did all these CARS interviews, but also did like multiple other interviews at other schools virtually still too. I think the hardest part initially was just getting used to I very much feed off of people's energy, and so not being in that same space with them was really hard at first, to sort of be like, okay, how do I cultivate for not only myself but for them like a space where we both feel comfortable here, like that this is normal and most people do this every day, right? At least now we've kind of had a year of getting adjusted to talking on Zoom. But I would say that was definitely the hardest part, was just not being able to feel honestly. And just, I remember I was actually living abroad in Spain last year, so I had like a time zone difference. Lily was sitting crisscross applesauce in my tiny Spanish apartment on my bed with textbooks. I think I brought over literally like a GRE book and like stacked everything up. I looked ridiculous, but they couldn't tell. But yeah, I think that was the hardest part, and really it just sort of took like, I did one, I did two, and then it just sort of was like, okay, this is how it's going. We're in a flow now. It's going to be great. And just kind of rolling from there, if that makes sense. Dylan, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I 100% agree. I think for one of the challenges for me was that you know, I had all these experiences. I had this like resume that I wanted to talk about and express and like talk about how I think I'd be great for this, this, and that. But then you do have that shortened time frame. And I think that maybe the benefit of virtual interviewing is that because you can just switch so quickly, they're going to give you more time and investment into like that initial chit chatter of just like trying to get to know you before you even start asking interview questions. But again, for me, like another challenging aspect was just very similar to what Rachel said. Like I feed off people's energy. I feed off like the vibes. And so it gets difficult. But I think that if you're just your authentic self and try to pretend that the screen is just there to divide you and pretend they're in the same room as you and just have a conversation, you'll find a lot of success with that.
Really quick, Rach, before we jump into the next question, I want to make sure that everyone sees what Sam put in the chat, that it's really important to note that not all of the employers at Clemson are going to release their decisions on the same day. People will hear back on kind of a rolling basis. It's really just dependent on what the employers want to do. Sometimes they may offer someone a position and they might decline, so then they'll go to someone else and you might hear back later. Some of the offices just kind of waited, not really sure why, to make their calls. So if you don't hear back on the first or second day that people start getting calls, do not worry. And I would really echo what Sam said, that if this is where you want to be, you can definitely take your time and not like rush to accept an offer at another school or figure something else out if you want to be at Clemson. Like not everyone is going to hear back in those first couple of days, but it will work out for the best. So be patient, as much as that probably doesn't help to hear. Sometimes it's just necessary. Cool. All right. So next question that we have, were there any questions that you were asked that were difficult or really hard to answer? If so, what were those questions and what advice would you give to answer them?
So I think between all my interviews at every institution I visited, the number one question was like, tell me about yourself, which is kind of this like big intimidating question, because you're like, how do I wrap up 20 plus years of my life into a 60-second explanation? I think that's something I struggled with. I think that as I went through the process, I kind of just got this like elevator pitch going. I think that's something you could practice with, especially because you have a little more flexibility in this virtual setting, of practice writing out what you think you're going to say. Hit some of those key points of like who you are and how you identify, and try to pinpoint how you can be in that office and how you can contribute to that space. So for me, I was super involved in alternative break programs, and that's what I was interviewing for. But I really didn't mention alternative breaks a lot because I already saw that in my resume. So I talked about what it was like for me to be a first gen student, to go to a really small private liberal arts college, and that transition and what I was expecting from that. So I think the best advice I can give to that question of tell me about yourself is give a brief overview of who you are and how you contribute to the office. And that's just going to lead into further questions they're going to ask you, or you can build off that later questions.
That's great advice, Dylan. You know, Bradford, I wish I could remember. There was totally a question. I don't think it was actually a question that Clemson asked me. There's totally a question that I remember getting thrown by in an interview. And I remember I was like, literally after that interview ended, I was like, I botched that answer. Like that was not good. And so anyways, the one piece of advice I can give you, if that does happen to you, you do have a question, to make yourself feel a little bit better about it later, immediately after that interview, because that question at the time was so super fresh in my head, I literally wrote that question down and then wrote out, like took just bullet points of like how I actually would have wanted to answer that question, just so I could like see it in front of myself, like, okay, did not say what I wanted to say, but if someone asks me this type of question again, I've now gotten I pulled out the information from my brain, so I'm ready if a similar question comes out. And honestly, that was super helpful, and it also just made me feel a bit better. I was like, okay, that might not have been great, but I know I could have answered that question better now. having been asked it. I wish I remember what it was. I don't think it was anything crazy, but I just was very thrown by it, and I remember that, and just took notes immediately after that interview ended on how I would have answered it.
Definitely. I think that was really good advice. And I would also say, like, you don't have to answer a question right away. You can pause for a second. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of silence. And you can also, a lot of the interviews kind of ended with a question along the lines of, is there anything else that you want to add, or what else would you like to tell us about you? And that can also be a time for you to maybe add on to some of your responses from earlier, now that you've had a little bit more time to think about the question. So I'd recommend using that tactic too. And like Haley said in the chat, a lot of interviewers will ask you about a time that you failed and what you learned from it. This shouldn't be too intimidating of a question, hopefully, because every single one of us has failed in multiple ways by the time we're getting to grad school. But the important thing is talking about tangible things that you took from that experience and how you've used that to improve since then. But I'd say that was a really common question as well. Let's see. Next question I have for you, Dylan and Rachel. What did you do to prepare for your interviews, if anything?
I think, oh gosh, I don't know what you do, Dylan, but I just remember sitting at my kitchen table and I looked at all the position descriptions of all of the assistantships that I was going to be interviewing for. And honestly, just like, I looked at that and I was like, okay, what are some relevant experiences of mine that I feel like I could be pulling from and talking about when saying, okay, here's why I think I'd be a good fit for this role. And like, when I kid you, like, I wrote out, like, so I was like, this is what I did for this. This is a skill I picked up. This is an experience I had. This is a, you know, X number of students or a percentage. I don't even know. Literally just wrote down whatever I could get out of my brain that I thought would be applicable for that one position, and then did it for all of the positions, which is a little excessive. But again, it did help sort of just get all of those thoughts in my brain down onto paper. And that also was really helpful for interviews later on, because I'd hashed out a lot of things that I thought were going to be very applicable for student affairs settings. And so when I was going back to prepare for later interviews at different institutions, I had all those things in front of me to reference in like my handwriting, not like just from my resume, you know what I mean? But like, I had actually taken the time to like, okay, how do I want to formulate this experience? So I would say that was probably my biggest prep, like time prep, basically for these interviews.
Yeah, I did something very similar. I just printed out all the position descriptions that I was interviewing for, and then on the back, I would just research about the office, about the people that I knew would be interviewing me, and I just wrote down notes. I did as much research as possible, and I think another key point of that is colleges love acronyms, and your interviewer will sometimes just throw acronyms at you. They're going to be really impressed if you could remember the acronym is. So my office is the Center for Student Leadership and Engagement. That's a huge mouth blurb. Everyone calls it CSLE in our office. So if they mention that and you like rephrase the question back at them when you're answering, saying what the acronym is, simple things like that are just going to really impress them. Doing research about certain programs, even programs that aren't on the position description, you can ask about. So an example from mine was one of our leadership conferences that it didn't relate to my position, but I knew I'd work with them slightly. And so I asked that question of how would we collaborate with this program, even programs they didn't even mention.
And one thing I will say too, I think Kelly and Abby, you guys have your hands raised too. But I will say I did, again, looking at those descriptions, doing some research, I did have at least 3 questions prepared for every position going into. And obviously if something came up, again, jot that down, but it just made me feel better knowing that like I did have questions already in case like during the interview, you get nervous, you suddenly like black out while they're talking or something, and don't remember what they were sharing. At least you have stuff in front of you. And it's totally okay to be like, you know, I've actually prepared some questions. It's okay to look at them, and you know what I mean? Like, that's in a normal interview, that's totally okay. So it's okay to be like, actually, I have a question. Give me a sec. Okay. can I ask you, da, 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 da. Yeah, so I would, again, up to you. Maybe you're really great and you can listen really well and pull questions out while people are talking, which is awesome. But I would recommend having at least a couple questions that like are floating around in your brain and you've got written down somewhere that you feel prepared to ask.
Kelly, I think I saw your hand first, so why don't you go? And then we'll do Abby next.
Okay, hey, I'm Kelly. I've got 2 questions. So my first, and it is not like nearly as cocky as it sounds, but do you just get one offer? If you're gonna get an offer, can you get multiple? Like, I live here in Clemson. It's Clemson or bust for me. So like, if I get that first offer, do I just say I accept, or is it like more might roll in and you take your time? And then my second question, and I swear I'm not obsessed with being older, but I graduated college 11 years ago. And I feel like, is it silly to talk about my undergrad at this point? Or like that's still relevant? Because I know like it doesn't feel like 11 years ago. I can pull on a lot of stuff from my undergrad, but I do have 11 years more of additional experiences. So do you know what I mean? Like, is that even relevant at this point? I don't know. You tell me.
I'd 100% say it's relevant. Clemson actually has a large number of students who we consider non-traditional or above the college age. So if you can point out in an interview that you can relate to your experience in college being so many years ago and people being in college now who are older, I think that actually gives you a lot of advantages with having conversations about what you can bring to a table at a certain office.
And again, it definitely does, you definitely don't have to like, I mean, I wouldn't just pull from your undergrad and just like, you know, experiences what you did. Obviously you have 11 years of life that happened after that. Use that. But if something from college still feels like very applicable to that position, absolutely bring that into the conversation. And then to answer your earlier question with like having most offers, other people in this, can y'all jog my memory on this? If you, because you get one offer, but then you have to accept or decline that. And then what happens if you decline? Does anyone else want to fill that in?
I can jump in on this, Rachel. So you'll get one offer, like initially you won't get multiple at the same time. And then if you decline that offer, last year you were put back into the pool to be eligible for other offers. That was not the case when I went through GARS. If you declined, you were out of the pool. I honestly am not sure what they're doing this year, if anyone else knows, but I do know for sure that you get one offer out of the gate. You don't get multiple all at once.
That's perfect. Thank you. I'll take anything they want to give me. So I'm excited.
I don't know the answer to if they're putting you back in the pool at all or not, but I will say the risk that you do run is if you do decline an offer and go back into the pool, know that, you know, if there are maybe 40 positions that were open for the year, 30 of them might already be filled. So those last 10 people might be hard to get in with one of them. I don't think I've heard of anybody that's declined an offer then got a second offer, as far as I know, just with how competitive Clemson is. So if you're Clemson or bust, take what you get. You'll, like I said, I couldn't even spell career services when I came in and interviewed. I didn't interview it, didn't know where that office was in my undergrad, and I love what I'm doing right now. So you'll end up where you're supposed to be.
Awesome. All right, Abby, what you got?
Okay. Hi, I'm Abby. Thank you, Rachel and Dylan, for answering that previous question, because that's kind of what my approach was going to be, to look at the descriptions and then see how my experience matches up. When did you guys get your interview schedule? Like, when did you know which ones you'd be interviewing for?
That was right. Like we submitted our, gosh, like we had like ranked things first, and then I think it was a couple of days the day before interviews were supposed to be happening, like we got our schedules. And I do remember, again, it's a little fuzzy because truly I was 6 hours ahead of Clemson time when this was all happening, and it was delayed last year due to like snow, not which wasn't really snow, but it pushed it back. So, and then they had to do some changing around, but if I remember correctly, it was very close to the interview the day or two before you got your like schedule of who would be interviewing you for the day.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is cram the information.
Yeah. And again, there's, you'll be able, when like for thinking on what your experiences are, it'll flow a little quicker than you think. And again, you don't have to do like a deep dive into like researching each office and department and everything. Truly just like reading the description and being like, that, I don't know what that is. I just want to go look that up. Maybe I can ask a question from it, or that is confusing. I'm going to try to see, oh, it's still not answered. Cool. I'm going to write that question down. But yes, yeah. Depending on how many you're getting, yes, that it could be a lot of preparation in like a short amount of time, but you'll be okay.
No, I echo what Rachel said. I think that, I wouldn't stress yourself out about like trying to do like a sensitive amount of research. Just focus on some of those key aspects, focus on what you're interested in, focus on what you have questions about, just like what Rachel said, and focus on those and then try to answer those questions for yourself and then ask those questions when you're interviewing.
Definitely. All right, well, I know we want to make sure that we end on time. So thank you all for submitting those questions. If you have more questions, Erica sent the CU-GARS email in the chat. They are a wonderful resource to answer any of your questions, or you all should be paired with a host. And they all are very excited to pass on their knowledge and help all of you. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to them as well. So I will pass things over to Haley for a couple of closing reminders, but thank you all for your questions.
Yeah, and thank you so much to y'all for joining us. Thanks for sticking with us through those technical difficulties. But, we're practicing what we preach, roll with the punches, everything's okay. You all got the information that you needed, hopefully. Just for some closing reminders, we do have a few more upcoming webinars. So on the 13th, which is this Saturday, we have Get to Know Clemson and Affinity Spaces. On the 16th, we have an alumni panel with some of our amazing alumni. And then you don't want to miss it, the Student Affairs Faculty Q&A. The faculty are arguably the best part of this program. They are incredible human beings. So I really encourage you all to go and get to know them as best as you can through Zoom. But yeah, so those are the upcoming webinars we have. And then obviously you all know interview day is next Friday, but please reach out to your hosts, reach out to the CU-GARS email, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions. Lastly, would not be student affairs if there wasn't a assessment how'd we do survey at the end. So please scan this QR code with your phone and take our quick assessment. Tell us how we did so we can improve this for the future. Fingers crossed we never have to do a virtual GARS again, but if we do, we know it's going to be great because this year is going to be great. But again, yes, we can definitely send the assessment link in the chat. I can pull that up really quick. But does anyone have any last minute questions, concerns?
I don't have a question, Haley, but I do just want to say, I do want to plug personally just all of the other webinars that are happening before GARS. Let me tell you, as someone who went through GARS virtually last year, none of this was offered before. So I did not get to hear from faculty. I did not get to hear from current students. I literally just sat down with supervisors and interviewed. So if you have the time and are able, if you can sit in, if you can take another hour on Zoom, I would highly recommend going and listening, just because like I wish I had been able to get this information and hear about these experiences before deciding to come to Clemson. I think it would have made my decision honestly that much easier. But anyways, if anyone has any questions, but I just wanted to just throw that in there. it's nice that everything is at least virtual for you all this year.
And Madison's working on putting the link. Yeah, the link is in the chat as well if the QR code does not work for you. But yeah, that is the end of our webinar. Thank you all so much for coming, and good luck with your interviews next week. You're going to do great. We'll stick around in case you all have any other questions. Bye, y'all.
Thank you so much.